What I've got in front of me is a really cool trigger for a Glock. This is a ZEV Technologies Fulcrum Trigger Complete Set. This is set you back retail from GlockWorx, who sells these. GlockWorx and ZEV are the same company, about 250 bucks. It's about 210 bucks from Brownells, okay? Now let me show you what's part of it and why it's cool. We have the trigger unit itself. Now this, you get a complete trigger. This is the trigger, the drawbar, the trigger housing back here. You get the ejector, you get the new disconnector, and you get the springs. You get all of it. It's all here. All right. Now, what makes this different? Well, let me rotate this around here and show you this. In the front of the trigger here, get that, you'll see a set screw. Now this set screw, by adjusting this in, takes out much of the take-up of the trigger, so that long, mushy take-up on the Glock is removed by driving that screw in. Second one that you've got is on the back of the trigger here, and this gets rid of the significant over travel that Glocks are known for. So you get rid of the over travel, you get rid of the take-up, and you end up with a relatively short trigger pull and a fast reset distance, which is maybe only 1/4 of an inch back and forth, and you don't have that as the trigger lets go of the striker, which causes your Glock to typically dip. So it's going to improve your accuracy as well. Now, the trigger itself, the shoe here, is made of aluminum. It's wider than a stock trigger. It's much more sturdy in the rear. Instead of the little plastic nubbin, you have an actual coil spring back here for the safety portion. The safety portion itself is significantly wider, and the whole thing is flat and much more comfortable, much more durable. All parts of the trigger bar itself are polished, pretty much looking like Jean Shuey triggers here, but sides, tops, all of that. This is the way it comes from the factory, very highly polished. You'll notice the tab here that depresses or pushes up out of the way the firing pin blocking plunger. Rather than be in a straight line here, has kind of a hump and comes up quick. And the reason for that is twofold. Number one, you feel it much less in here because you're not taking up the plunger at such an angle, so it reduces the felt pressure. And this last pump here is just before that sear lets go of the striker. This finishes the rest of the way and pushes it up out of the way. So actually it makes it feel better, and it's much more positive as well. Okay? Now, we get back here. We have the standard, what's usually a 3.5 pound connector, and the springs come with two. You have a 6 pound spring, trigger return spring. We'll show the trigger return spring right there. Keep in mind that a Glock trigger return spring, rather than pushing the trigger forward at the bottom, actually helps you pull the trigger. So you're not pulling against the firing pin, or I'm sorry, the trigger spring on a Glock. It's actually assisting your pull. So the heavier the spring, the lighter your pull will be, because that heavier spring is giving you more assist in the pull. It's helping pull back and hold the striker back there when it's all locked up. Okay, so that's cool. Now, you also get a firing pin here, which is, or striker firing pin, which is much lightened. You can see the lightning cuts, you can see the holes, the fluting, and the rest of that. It also comes highly polished, and it's significantly lighter, which increases the speed, the lock time, and because it's much lighter, you can go with a lighter spring. So you get your choice of two striker springs. One's a 2 pound and one's a 3 pound. So however you feel about it, if for tactical or whatever use or defense, you may want to go with a heavier spring. That's your business. And a lighter trigger return spring, which would increase your trigger pull and give you more reliability on the striker. I will tell you, though, that I've had no problems whatsoever using this in the lightest spring, making sure that all those cartridges fired, and I've tried a bunch of different cartridges. Now, when you put this in the gun, and if you use the strongest trigger return spring and the lightest striker spring, you end up with about a 3-pound, 3-pound, 4-ounce pull, which is very light, fast reset, no over travel. If you use the 4-pound trigger return spring, which is the lighter of the two, and you use the heavier striker spring, you end up about 4 pounds, 5 ounces, somewhere in that neighborhood. Now, even with the stock light Glock trigger, you end up with about a little over 5¼ pounds. So each one of these takes it down about a pound. There's a significant difference in the feel. Now, because of this and because of the fact that they've done a fine job finishing this at the factory, if you feel compelled to polish for whatever reason, it's not necessary, but you don't even need to take your ceramic stone and try and polish off the rear of the sear here. It's not necessary. There's no lips, no edges, no cuts. Now, back off to another thing here. Not long ago, I showed you the firing pin retaining plate that had been shortened down so I could diagnose a problem that I had. Well, as it turns out, the problem was because of that vertical play on the slide, this trigger assembly was not working well because it had so little engagement. It only had like 20 thousandths engagement, and with the movement of the slide, it could slip down after it wore. So what I did is I talked to the people at ZEV, and I want to thank them for being so helpful here. First of all, they helped me diagnose the problem. Second of all, they had a solution to the problem. Number one, you'll notice the top of the drawbar here in sear assembly, there's a plus here. What this is they have bent this slightly up, and it comes bent up. Don't be bending your own here. But the sear tab is slightly bent up more, just maybe about another 15 thousandths or so than the stock tab. That cured the problem immediately. Now there's some other things I can do. I may be able, because it's got more now than I think it needs, I can probably go ahead and take some here off the top, but that's another story for another time. So they were very helpful. They solved my problem. Oh, one other thing. They say the problem is that the old 1-pin Glocks, that would be the Gen 1, Gen 2, and the first part of the Gen 3 guns, where you don't have the separate pin that holds the locking block in, have some issues because the plastic frame moves around, everything tends to move around a little. So that does develop. This problem does not develop in Gen 4 guns. They'll also tell you that when you're adjusting the screws here, the adjustment screws on the trigger, that they've been Loctited. Originally they were Loctited with blue Loctite. All you need to do is take your cigarette lighter and heat this area. You could also use a little piezo torch, whatever. Heat it up a little bit, back the screw out, make your changes, then count it as you backed it out to the point that this showed, throw some more Loctite on it, and you were ready to go. They had some issues with people not re-Loctiting them, so they started using red Loctite. Therefore, a cigarette lighter wasn't working, and we had to use a little more heat. That's fine, don't worry about it. So if you got a later trigger like this, go ahead and use a little piezo torch on it. Don't turn it red or anything, and don't leave this in. Just heat it up, it'll back out, it'll work just fine. So very helpful people. If you call them, they'll talk to you, and their customer service is wonderful. That's the ZEV Technologies Fulcrum Trigger.